Fresh trouble is brewing for Trump in Hormuz, with a new actor now entering the crisis through an alleged shipping fraud that is exploiting fear across the waterway. A Western maritime security company has sounded the alarm over fake transit messages in Hormuz, even as the US-led pressure campaign continues to choke normal shipping movement. Trump's naval blockade is now facing fresh ridicule, with reports of scammers demanding transit fees for supposed safe passage through a strait that remains effectively shut. If not Iran, then the key question is who exactly is offering ships safe passage through Hormuz while the US still struggles to enforce control over the crisis zone. MARISKS, a Greek maritime risk management company, has flagged a major shipping scam targeting vessels caught up in the Strait of Hormuz crisis. The firm says fraudulent messages are being circulated promising ships safe passage through Hormuz at a time of extreme uncertainty in the waterway. Some shipping companies have reportedly received messages offering transit in exchange for cryptocurrency payments. MARISKS issued its alert on April 20th, warning shipowners about the ongoing fraud, according to Reuters. The messages demand transit fees in cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin or Tether in return for supposed clearance. The firm said these specific messages are a scam, while also clarifying that they were not sent by Iranian authorities. Reuters also reported that at least 2 ships recently said Iranian boats had fired shots at them in the area. That incident came after Iran had briefly reopened the Strait of Hormuz on April 18th before tightening restrictions again. MARISKS said it believes at least one of the vessels hit by gunfire had fallen victim to the fraud scheme. Message cited by MARISKS said, and I quote, "After providing the documents and assessing your eligibility by the Iranian security services, we will be able to determine the fee to be paid in cryptocurrency, BTC or USDT. Only then will your vessel be able to transit the strait unimpeded at the pre-agreed time." Unquote. Iran has kept the Strait of Hormuz shut while blaming the US naval blockade for the continued closure. The US military's claim that it would not allow Iranian ships to transit through the Hormuz Strait has been sharply contradicted, as new reports suggest that multiple Iranian-linked vessels have in fact passed through these strategic waters. Maritime intelligence agency Lloyd's List has asserted that dozens of Iranian ships have successfully crossed the Hormuz Strait, undermining Washington's narrative of a tight and impenetrable blockade. Data compiled by Lloyd's List, and reported by the outlet Iran International on April 20th ahead of the truce's expiry, paints a very different picture from US military briefings and official statements. At least 26 ships connected to Iran's so-called Shadow Fleet are reported to have bypassed the US blockade on Tehran's ports, slipping through the cracks of enforcement and continuing their journeys. The report cited vessel tracking data that showed continued tanker movements tied to Iranian trade, indicating that energy shipments and commercial routes have remained active despite public claims of severe restrictions. Several oil and gas tankers carrying Iranian energy exports are said to have departed the Gulf despite the curbs, suggesting that Iran's export lifelines are far from completely severed. Iran's Shadow Fleet is described as a network of aging or lightly regulated ships specifically used to evade international sanctions and keep vital oil and gas revenues flowing. These ships typically operate with obscured ownership structures and masked tracking data to move oil and gas under the radar, making it difficult for authorities to monitor, intercept, or halt their activities. This revelation emerged just a day after the US Navy seized an Iranian cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman, highlighting the stark contrast between headline-grabbing interceptions and the quieter reality of ongoing Iranian maritime trade. An Iranian-flagged vessel reportedly transited the Strait of Hormuz on April 20th, despite the ongoing US naval blockade aimed at restricting Iranian maritime traffic. The semi-official Tasnim news agency reported on April 20th that the Iran-flagged cargo ship Shoja 2 was moving through the strait, underscoring continued movement even under tightened restrictions. The cargo vessel is said to have departed from Shahid Raji port, Iran's key commercial hub near Bandar Abbas, which serves as a major outlet for the country's non-oil trade. Ship tracking data from marine traffic also showed the vessel in transit through the strait, as highlighted in an Al Jazeera report mapping recent movements in the waterway. Meanwhile, Tasnim reported a sharp drop in overall traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, indicating that the choke point has effectively slowed to a near standstill. Citing shipping data, Tasnim said that only 3 vessels transited the strait over the last 12 hours, reflecting the impact of both the US blockade and Iranian-imposed controls. Just one tanker, described as Nero and operating under British sanctions, is reported to have exited the Persian Gulf, suggesting very limited commercial passage. At the same time, only 2 other ships were recorded entering the Gulf, illustrating how severely the flow of maritime traffic has been curtailed in the area. Trump may not be ready to extend the 2-week truce with Iran as the deadline approaches, with the ceasefire now entering its final hours and fresh doubts growing over whether he wants to prolong the pause in fighting. The Wall Street Journal made that revelation on April 20th, citing sources who said Trump was unlikely to keep the ceasefire in place if no agreement is reached before the current deadline runs out. The 2-week ceasefire in Iran is set to expire on April 22 amid rising uncertainty over the talks, leaving negotiators under pressure as the diplomatic window appears to be narrowing fast. Notably, Iran has not publicly confirmed attendance in the second round of peace talks, and official Iranian messaging has continued to cast doubt over whether Tehran is fully on board. But Iran has signaled to mediators that it intends to send a delegation, according to reports, suggesting Tehran may still be keeping the door open for diplomacy despite its public hesitation. Trump is now being blamed for torpedoing the Iran talks with what officials described as non-stop public commentary at a highly delicate stage in the negotiations. Several of Trump's own advisors told CNN that the talks were on the verge of a breakthrough last week before his repeated public interventions began to complicate the process. However, Trump then began commenting publicly on the talks through social media posts and media interviews, injecting fresh uncertainty into an already fragile diplomatic track. Trump even went ahead and claimed that Iran was ready to give up its enriched uranium stockpile as part of a possible agreement. That move prompted Iranian officials to quickly issue denials of Trump's claims, pushing back against his version of the negotiations. The talks were at a sensitive stage when Trump began weighing in, and CNN reported that his public remarks did not help matters. US officials also suggested Trump caused further harm by continuing to take calls from reporters and speaking publicly as negotiations remained unresolved. Trump also recently created confusion over J.D. Vance's anticipated visit to Pakistan, adding to the broader uncertainty around the talks. On April 19th, Trump claimed that J.D. Vance would not be attending the second round of talks with Iran. Soon after, the White House clarified that Vance would in fact be leading the U.S. delegation in Pakistan. On April 20th, Trump then claimed in an interview that Vance had already departed for Islamabad. However, reports suggested that Vance was still in Washington at the time and was only expected to leave on April 21st. Trump subsequently claimed that a deal with Iran would be reached on April 20th itself, despite the fact that the talks were not scheduled until the following day. In reality, the talks were tied to April 21st and remained clouded by uncertainty over whether Iran would attend at all. Trump later told Bloomberg that the truce would end on April 22nd, further adding to the confusion over the diplomatic timeline. Iran released a video on April 19th showing underground missile and drone launchers, signaling that its strategic weapons infrastructure remains active despite weeks of war. The IRGC-linked video portrayed ongoing overhaul and reconstruction work on Iran's missile and drone stockpiles, suggesting Tehran is trying to showcase recovery and resilience during the ceasefire. IRGC Aerospace Force Commander Saeed Majid Mousavi said the replenishment of arms had been accelerated, according to reporting cited by Iranian outlets. Mousavi said the pace of replenishing weapons increased during the ceasefire period, indicating that Iran used the pause to restore parts of its arsenal. His remarks were reported by WANA and Press TV just ahead of the expected expiry of the ceasefire window. Saeed Majid Mousavi said, and I quote, "Iran's speed in updating and reloading missile and drone launchers have surpassed even its pre-war pace. We are aware that the enemy is incapable of creating such conditions for themselves during the ceasefire. Since the ceasefire began on April 11th, the United States has had to bring in ammunition from the other side of the world in a trickle. They have lost this phase of the war as well. They have lost the Strait, they have lost Lebanon, and they have lost the entire region." Unquote. Mousavi's claims came after US media reports argued that Iran still retained the ability to sustain its missile capability despite the conflict. The Wall Street Journal, citing US intelligence assessments, reported that Iran still has thousands of ballistic missiles in reserve. Those missiles could reportedly be pulled out of hiding or retrieved from underground sites, reinforcing concerns that Iran's strike capacity was not eliminated. President Donald Trump announced that the U.S. military carried out the seizure of the Iranian vessel on April 19. The U.S. military also released footage showing Navy fire hitting the cargo ship while it was out at sea. According to reports, a U.S. missile destroyer intercepted the ship as it allegedly attempted to head toward Iran. The Iran-flagged vessel was said to be traveling toward Bandar Abbas port when it was stopped, according to the U.S. military. U.S. officials say the ship ignored communications for more than 6 hours, which led forces to take action. The destroyer then reportedly ordered the crew to evacuate the engine room before opening fire to disable the vessel. Several shells from the warship's 5-inch Mk-45 gun struck the engine area, leaving the ship immobilized in the water. U.S. troops later boarded the Iranian vessel and took control without meeting any further resistance. The ship is now in U.S. custody following the operation, according to U.S. Central Command. U.S. officials say the vessel was taken into custody after it allegedly tried to break a U.S. blockade on Iranian ports. Iran has strongly condemned the operation as armed piracy and theft, and has vowed retaliation over what it calls a violation of the truce. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "Today, an Iranian-flagged cargo ship named Tuska, nearly 900 feet long and weighing almost as much as an aircraft carrier, tried to get past our naval blockade, and it did not go well for them." The U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer USS Spruance intercepted the Tuska in the Gulf of Oman, and gave it a fair warning to stop. The Iranian crew refused to listen, so our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engineer room. Right now, U.S. Marines have custody of the vessel. The Tuska is under U.S. Treasury sanctions because of its prior history of illegal activity. We have full custody of the ship, and are seeing what's on board. In response, Iranian media said drone attacks were launched targeting U.S. warships operating nearby. Iranian officials described the strikes as direct retaliation for what they called a U.S. act of aggression. Iran strongly condemned the incident and warned that further retaliation against the U.S. would follow. Ibrahim Zolfagari said, and I quote, "The aggressor United States violated the ceasefire and committed maritime piracy by firing at an Iranian merchant ship in the waters of the Sea of Oman and landing a number of its terrorist marines on the deck of the vessel, disabling its navigation system. We warn that the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran will soon respond to this armed piracy and retaliation by the U.S. Army," unquote. The operation comes at a time of fragile ceasefire and growing uncertainty over ongoing diplomatic efforts. The U.S. action also came just 2 days before the 2-week ceasefire with Iran was due to end. Meanwhile, Iran says it has no plans yet to attend the next round of talks in Pakistan. According to reporting cited by the Wall Street Journal, the Pentagon is now pushing major U.S. automakers to pivot into weapons production. The U.S. War Department is said to be in talks with household names like Ford and General Motors, exploring how their assembly lines can be adapted for war. Officials are exploring whether auto factories can be retooled to produce missiles, loitering munitions, and other tactical hardware at scale. Analysts warn that the U.S. is facing a worsening shortage of critical missiles such as THAAD interceptors, PRSM and ATACMS tactical missiles, and Tomahawk cruise missiles. By late March, some reports estimated that the U.S. had less than a month's worth of THAAD and PRSM missiles left at current rates of fire. A UK think tank went further, projecting that the U.S. would effectively run out of THAAD interceptors by April 17, and exhaust its PRSM and ATACMS stocks even earlier, by April 12. By the end of March, reports suggested that the U.S. had already fired roughly a quarter of its entire Tomahawk missile inventory in the Iran conflict.